Constructed Criticism is brought to you by our three amazing sponsors, Grey Viking Games, Oasis Games, and PureMTGO.com. You can find them directly in the links in the show notes and use the codes associated with each sponsor. We appreciate each of them and definitely think that you should check them out for all your Magic the Gathering needs. Now sit back and enjoy this week's episode of Constructed Criticism.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 379th episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your Lear-hating host, Mason, joined by my Lear-loving host, Abe, and my It's Just Right host, Spencer. How are y'all doing today?
You know, I'm doing pretty good. I do have a question, though, because one of the questions that's been asked on this podcast is the red card better than the blue card, right? Which one of those went farther in the tournament, Mason?
I would argue that Restless Stormseeker didn't pick up a single loss this weekend.
I mean, it did in the finals, right?
It did not. It wasn't in the deck, was it?
It was in that teamer deck.
It went further then. I spent a lot of time looking over the deck list for Worlds, as shown right there.
Am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong. No, it is there. Okay.
There are two Restless.
Man, you made me doubt myself. I'm pretty sure Mason's card went farther at Worlds. So Abe, tell me, whose card is better? The card that goes further in the World Championship or the one who has more copies in the World Championship?
I mean, this is such a loaded question. The card is Lear's just so much more defining of the format right now. It's literally was a card played to stop the Swath Medic. It was so good.
It's hard to know what's so good and what's so dependent. It's such a philosophical question. Should we be results-oriented by the better card getting second? Or should we look at the impact overall? It really is such a great and a beautiful intro, especially as we made sure to spend some time this week before the show talking about how we should make every episode specifically for the new listeners. And I'm sure new listeners, this totally makes sense for them. Everyone, we're going to have a fun episode today learning about some lessons from the World Championship. I don't know if you've heard, but the Magic the Gathering World Championship happened this past weekend, and we have a new champion. Before we get into that, I'll just say, all of our World Champions for the last 2 years, Fairies Masters. So if you want to be a Master of Magic, yeah, Master Fairies. I think that's the new bar, the new quota. But either way, we have a lot to talk about. But first, we do need to do the always improving portion of the show. It is the main reason we are here on this podcast, trying to get better and improve. And Spencer, I'm going to let you fire away first. What's your always improving moment?
Oh, man, I had so many this week. Mostly because it's funny, because we were supposed to record. We normally record on Mondays, but we were recording on Tuesday today. And then last night, before bed, I just fired up a bunch of the decks from this tournament to really get in some games with them. And I had a lot of moments this week, but I actually want to talk about things that happened before that even happened, which is when the unfortunate events of the deck lists for this event getting leaked happened. First of all, I just want to say, so we can just cover it now, I don't think any of us were happy that happened. We probably all felt bad for the competitors. It really sucked.
It was great for my article.
Yeah, it's probably great for us as content creators, but in all honesty, I don't think any of us, if any of us put ourselves in the position of those competitors, we were all like, man, that really sucks that now you have to do 20 to 40 more hours of work minimum to compete in this event. That really sucks, especially after you've submitted your deck, you can't change your mind. You're done. You're supposed to be done now, or focusing on draft. A lot of people probably were I'm going to submit my deck, and then after my deck, I'm just going to jam drafts, and all of a sudden, anybody who jam drafts first, that changed for. That being said, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is just kind of those moments of not questioning yourself, and stuff like that. So the one that I want to talk about is actually Sculptor of Winter. We saw that in Paulo Vitor Dama Rosa's list, friend of the podcast. I should invite him on. He submitted Sculptor of Winter in his deck list. And what's really funny is this is actually something that I had thought about a lot this format. What what mana creature should you play? Between Sentinel, between Lotus Cobra, between Sculptor of Winter. And Sculptor of Winter was actually on my radar as something that doesn't die to Spike Feed Hazard, and that doesn't... the other one is it Shambling Ghast is the name of the 1/1?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, there are a few cards that, like, when you're playing Lotus Cobra, which I played a lot of in this deck because you get to attack and use mana at the same time, Shambling Ghast is, like, a beating when you're playing Lotus Cobra. And the other one being... I can't remember the name of the Flipland card off the top of my head.
Tangled Floor Hedron.
Thank you. The Hedron was the only word I could remember. Like, you just get kind of beaten down pretty bad against those black decks. Obviously, in this tournament, it didn't matter. I don't think a single person submitted a black deck. But Sculptor of Winter actually fixes a lot of those problems while still getting to be aggressive against some of those more controlling builds. And it's funny, the always improving moment for me is that if you have an idea that you believe is good and you have a good reason for it, you have a plan for it, you should test it before discounting it. Because the reason that I didn't do it is because I don't play as much Magic as other people right now. Clearly somebody else would have already done this if it was good. Now, what's funny is Paulo actually had the second best record among the mono green players in this event with his mono green deck. Mono green did not do good in this event for what it's worth. But I do think that, like, the deck building moments that I learned from that and just made me reflect on, like, why haven't you done this? This is something you've already thought about, was really insightful. The other thing that it also did is it fixed a lot of my problems that I had with all I mean, Paulo didn't have this problem because of the way he built his deck, but the deck really did have a problem sometimes with activating your brawls with snow, and this actually counts as a snow permanent that would tap itself to kill something. And since then, I have played mono green to great success with that in mind. So that's kind of my always improvement moment, is just like, if you have an idea, test it. Don't just, like, I don't know, don't have self-doubt just because for like no reason. So anyway, that's it for me.
Abe, I think yours actually kind of ties into something similar to Spencer's. So while I have something I want to say about Spencer's, I think I should let you go first, and then we can do a little 2-for-1, a little divination in this house.
Yeah.
Did you just say divination is the 2-for-1 though? Because, like, come on, man. Bloodbrain.
Every episode, someone's first. I don't know how much they know about Magic. This is such a good behind-the-scenes joke. We made a big effort about we should be, like, really conscious. It's everyone's first episode.
I love it.
We've been doing 380, and I'm over here like, what if I bring it up a bunch on the front of the scene?
Yeah, you're being a sweetheart to Spencer right now.
So yeah, my always improvement this week actually didn't come from Worlds really, but has come from the effort that Mason and me and a handful of our peers are putting into preparing for the Invitational, where we're looking over all the modern deck lists, all the standard deck lists, kind of trying to find ways that we can maybe push the ball a little further uphill and get a little bit of an edge up on the competition. And specifically, I've been playing a lot of Hammer Time. There have been a lot of different builds out there, and Mason put out an idea of something tangential to something else we're working on, based on his observation, and I was like, you know what? That looks really good, and I'm going to try it. Where a lot of people, the message had gone unread for unresponded to for maybe 2 or 3 days, and I was like, wait, this idea actually has something to it, and it very much linked to your Spencer. I was instead of just dismissing it as I'm sure a lot of people who read it did, or maybe didn't think about it more than for a second, being well, the whole concept is bad, maybe it's not worth it. I was like, I want to try this because if it is good, the upside is just so high, and it's really important to keep an open mind, and that's really what I feel is the thing to take away, is that it's never a bad idea to think outside the box, and to, when you see an idea that you really might believe in or has legs, to take the time to go for it.
So I have 2 questions. I have a comment and then a question. The first comment I want to make is, I think that too often that we as Magic players might value our time a little too highly because we all have limited time. And the truth is like, if you have an idea that you believe is good, don't just dismiss it. Like this is how you are supposed to spend your time. Now, that being said, like, there's probably some amount of the time that instead of actually putting it to practice and jumping into a league on Moto or jumping into ladder, that you can actually just like say, okay, what are the problems with this, and then evaluate from there. My question is this about deflecting palm? Is this what's happening right now?
No, that had to do with the process of testing this idea, where I played against Burn, and the only way I could die was deflecting palm.
Okay.
I should have put some evil in his life, and I tried to promote it through Twitter to put more evil.
No, but I think it's a good lesson to learn. Is like what's the cost of putting I don't remember the name, the Sculptor of Winter, thank you, in your deck. Like, you're not playing Lotus Cobra for 5 matches. Like, whatever. Like, that does not actually cost you anything.
And if it plays out well and it's everything you want, then you find out that, and that's like so useful. I think that often a lot of people get tied up in, and myself included at times, get tied up in making sure, we don't do anything that sounds dumb or like looks stupid when we're like preparing, especially in groups, because it like, our appearance of being, smart and knowledgeable Magic players matters a lot to us. And but it's not a bad thing to say yes to an idea, and try to explore its possibilities instead of shutting it down or saying maybe and then not doing anything with it, because the times where you do hit are worth so much that all of the times that you miss tend to be worth it if you count it all up.
What's funny is that it is both true from an EV perspective and true from like a clout perspective. Like, if you like hit once, it's remembered for like Mason's like, yeah, but it's true, right? Like, what happens if you miss? You have a slightly worse card, like probably that you draw. I mean, it's just so low. Like
you learn a way not to invent the light bulb.
Right.
But when you do invent the light bulb, you invented the light bulb. It's pretty great. So just staying open-minded and not allowing myself to kind of fall into groupthink was really my always improving moment I wanted to share. So Mason, you said you had some stuff to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot's happened here, but the thing I'll say, and I'll kind of do this in reverse order here, I guess, to make it the easiest for the listeners, is that first, when it comes to like those, like, do you have these ideas or not? I think that like, because Spencer said like you should really hop in there. I think for some people they're like, I mean, I'd love to, I just don't have the time as much as I would like to. Like Spencer, they have jobs and families and kids, and me and Abe just have some anime to watch. But our priorities, while both equally important, take a little less time. Either way, but you should think about it and like think about the critical thinking that we talk about a lot on the show. Like, how does this work with the plan? How does this work with the deck? And if it passes those baseline things, you'll be really good, and you should go from there, because there are a lot of things in Magic that interact in weird ways and weird pieces, and those sort of interactions change things a lot. I actually have a great example of this. I've been writing my articles this week about is it Epiphany and Alrund's and should it go or not? And I basically have a portion where I'm defending not banning Alrund's Epiphany, which doesn't matter here or there. But I proposed the idea of, what if Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, was in Standard? What if that card was introduced in Crimson Vow, were injected today, just randomly, now it's part of the format? How does that affect the format? And, and like, I had some quick thoughts about it. I was like, oh yeah, that's probably really good for the white deck. It would do a lot to slow down is it doing to a bunch of turns things? Now it's an additional 2 mana, and they have to spend the mana there. And as I thought about it more, like as I was writing it, right, I was like, oh wow, this has huge implications for green, because green plays almost all creatures, but actually 12 to 10 of the creatures, depending on your build, are actually not creature spells. They're non-creature. And so your white deck would actually get a huge edge in this other thing. And those kind of rippling effects are why Magic is so cool. And a lot of people like to think that they think those things through all the way, and they would have, they're claiming that, oh, obviously, when I say that to them. But I'm smart enough to say that I didn't think of that when I first proposed the idea. And like, once I got a little more into it, the ripples started to happen. So just think about those things, and then testing it can go a really long way. Along those same lines, my always improving moment kind of ties into this another way, where I have been trying a lot of various decks in Modern. I wanted to try being able to beat Hammer Time, basically. So playing like a lot of blue-white, a lot of elementals, ghosting some 4-color builds. I just really want to be able to beat Hammer. And so all that sort of happened. Wasn't super happy with a lot of the decks, and came to some conclusions. I was like, okay, I want to put some more time in on blue-red Murktide. And the idea has been floated around a bunch. This is kind of public knowledge. That, like, Consider might be better than Thought Scour. And I was pretty opposed to the idea when first brought up, because I think that the raw card count, like the amount of material in places, is actually very important for the blue-red deck, and that it really is impactful for some of their best draws. Your deck loses a lot of power when it loses Thought Scour. You can't turn to a Murktide. We're having like Fetch Lane go and have removal spell or Thought Scour is very important. But I was like, people keep saying the Consider's good. I should try the Consider. Da da da. And what I learned when I was playing the Consider in the deck is that it is worse than Thought Scour in a lot of game 1 situations. But in games 2 and 3, you get a lot more selection of your cards for finding your sideboard cards. So it's kind of led to this like conclusion and this like development and process of like, okay, how do I want to set my deck up? Do I want my deck to be like really, really good in game 1s and almost like more affinity style, where like I'm going to kind of spike these game 1s and lose percentage points in the games 2 and 3s? Or am I willing to have a weaker card for the game 1s, and game 2 and 3 I'll have more selection and more things? And right now I'm landing on the side of like, well, you play more game 2 and 3s, and I think the sideboard cards I'm choosing to put in my deck are more like hammers than they are like buffers. And since they're more like hammers, I want to have access to them. So having a card that actually allows me to look through my deck instead of just put cards in zones, I think is much stronger. And so that was kind of my always improving moment from this week, was really trying to learn from like what these other things are doing and trying to figure out why these people are saying this, because no one ever told me that like the reason they want Consider is for games 2 and 3. And that might even be the reason, but I think it's a strong enough reason to have the conversation about. And I think it's worth like, I don't think it will always be right to have Consider. I think I could build my sideboard and my deck in a way where I actually want to be a turbo Murktide deck. And so I think
it's also
a lot to go there.
It's also, I think, one of those moments where like people often don't understand splits on cards, right? Like when you're looking at a deck list, people are like, why did you split these? A weird example of this is actually I played Twin Bolt for an RPTQ in a teamer deck over, I don't know if it was Lightning Strike or the equivalent of Lightning Strike or whatever, but people are like, Spencer, you have like this weird split of this card that's like completely unplayable. And it was like, yeah, because the mono red matchup specifically, Twin Bolt's are really good against. Like right now, a Tarka red actually just gets hosed by this card, and if you draw it, you actually usually just win that game no matter what. And I think that the same thing is true in the exact situation you're talking about, right? Like in certain metagames, people actually just can't deal with a Murktide that early. So if that's true, how many Thought Scours do I need to have a percentage of Murktides that work there? And while that isn't the conclusion you came to, that's how splits happen.
Let's move on to the main training grounds portion of the show. So we're going to be talking about learning from Worlds this week. Probably the place to start is what happened a week ago with the leaks in the decks. And there are basically a couple style of decks that came to Worlds, and we're going to kind of talk about those a bit today. So basically you had Izzet decks, which were almost all the Izzet decks were turns focused. So they didn't have any Goldspan Dragons in the main, except for one, which won the tournament. Then there was a Grixis style of deck, which was trying to do a similar thing, but use Leer and Duress and a little bit different removal to answer the green decks, and use Duress plus Leer as like a way to like maybe win the mirror, and then use Leer to beat the green decks and the white decks. And basically you're trying to be kind of this controlling deck. And then we had white be the kind of an aggro deck, and green be the mid-range deck of choice. And I think we should start with green, because our former world champion played it, and it didn't do that well. And it is a mid-range deck. And so I think that's kind of an important thing to kind of talk about here. And I'm curious, like, do we all agree that like green is a mid-range deck, even though it gets called like mono green, which I think a lot of people like think of as a beatdown deck traditionally, even though this deck is fairly aggressive? Is that something that we all kind of agree on here?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I forget who said it, but one of the Japanese players I remember tweeted that they said that like in their testing, they like referred to mono green as like the Abzan aggro of the format, which I thought was such an apt description of what the deck is. You know, it's for those not familiar, the Abzan aggro deck of old was this Siege Rhino, Fleeceman Lion, Dramoka's Command, Gideon, like mid-range beatdown deck that was just about putting a lot of good rate creatures in play and making good combats happen. And that's really what Mono Green's trying to do, right? It's about putting a lot of stats into play for as little mana as you can, and they all have, you know, either abilities you tie up your mana for, or that like net you some cards, and you're really trying to like play to the battlefield as much as you can, and control it that way through combat, which is definitely more of a mid-range thing than like your traditional like Ember Cleave mono red deck, or even the mono green aggressive deck prior, where you were just like, I'm casting my big things and attacking every turn, and I need to end the game. It does have a bit of grind to it with those things.
Yeah, I think that like when I look at this deck, it reminds me of. It's funny because I don't know how much the deck actually changed after this. And for historical listeners, like if you look up kind of the Bloodbraid Elf Jund Sprawling Thranex Putrid Leech decks, this deck reminds me of that a lot, but it's single colored. The thing is that mana was really good back then. So like, you know, playing Jund was free. Like you did it didn't cost you anything. It just like playing mono green cost you nothing in these snow decks. The thing is like if you look at the cards that you're playing, you know, you've got your mana cards. You know, you got your Sculptor of Winters. You've got your Rangers class for your 2-for-1s. But you're expecting a lot of 2-for-1s out of this deck. I actually was doing some looking at this. I think that for the cards you're expecting 2-for-1s from are Werewolf Pack Leader, Rangers class, Wrenn and 6. In all honesty, I think that you could almost consider Inscription of Abundance a 2-for-1 in a lot of situations. Asika's Chariot, or did I say Wrenn and 6? I meant Wrenn and 7. Like, the deck generates a lot of... I don't even know if it's simulated card advantage for a lot of these, right? Like, but you very much are trying to be the beatdown while generating value. And this is something that, historically in Magic, whether it is... you know, these Abzan decks from the Dragons of Gartier standard, whether it's these Jund decks from Alara standard, or I think even more recently, like some of the Naya decks that we saw, like the I just said miracles in my head. That is not the word that I'm looking for. But the adventures decks, right? Like they're just these aggressive mid-range decks generating value every turn. That is what this deck is trying to do. And what's funny is like a year ago, these decks all played 1-drops, right? Like whether it's, you know, Stonecoil Serpent and Innkeeper, because, you know, you had the adventures package. Now it's like, okay, well, our 1-drops are like, is it, what's the name of the, is it Shambling?
They're all unplayable.
Yeah, they're just all bad. I actually tried all of them for what it's worth. Like, I tried the Mushroom that flips into like a 3/3. I tried like they're all bad. And because of that, it really changes the dynamic of this deck, right? Like, the best 1-drop for this deck is a 1/2 that taps to another creature. And it's so bad in this deck to, like, take a turn off of attacking against decks that on turn 7, like, basically win the game. And it really puts this... Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I think you actually transition.
Well, so I was going to say, this is one of the things we talked about during the Always Improving segment, right? It's like, think about the card contextually, right? Are we going to play this 1/2 so we can play our aggressively costed 2-drop so we can ramp into our 3-drop that we have a couple 4s? It's like not a thing our deck's trying to do. And like the deck just has no ones that are able to do that. And the deck is, like they all said there, it is a aggressively slanted mid-range deck that has a lot of card advantage, a lot of grind potential, and basically never stumbles. The strength of this deck over a deck like Izzet, which we'll get to here in just one second, because I'm sure everyone wants to hear more about Izzet, they haven't heard enough of it, is that this deck doesn't stumble. This deck, all of its hands do a very similar thing, and all of its draws do a very similar thing. And they're very good at doing that, and they're very resilient. And so doing that sort of thing is why this deck actually does succeed. It's funny, we mentioned earlier how this deck didn't do very well at Worlds. PV had a bad record. Seth Manfield had a bad record, but Sam Pardee actually lost 3 win-ins for top 4 in a row. So, it's one of those things too, where it's like, didn't have a great weekend. There's like 3 different alternate universes where Pardee is in top 4. And even if Pardee loses, the narrative's way different around Mono Green. And we saw friend of the show, Will Pullingham, actually dominate. I believe going almost undefeated, just like conceded one round to the SCG to go get food. And dominated that the same weekend. So
I do actually believe, by the way, that Sam Hardy's list is the exact same as PV's.
Yeah, they worked together for the Pro
Yeah.
Tour. Yeah. And so those two worked, and they had a very good deck list. And so I think there's a lot to be said about Mono Green. And, going forward, I don't think you can discount this deck because it will always litmus test you. And as long as we have something like Epiphany that is making it very hard to be a bigger mid-range deck, it's very hard for anything to really hate out Mono Green in full. And so I think we're seeing that. Let's talk about the Izzet decks here because these are so important. I think we should probably talk about the one that didn't win the tournament first and then kind of talk about why we like the Dragons one. Because when we took a week off of the show because of some health and life stuff. But when we last talked to y'all, we talked about how we really liked the Dragons in the turns decks. They gave you a lot of game against things like Mono Green and Mono White and decks where you have to actually win the game. And then in the mirrors, it can be a little clunky at times, but it actually does win and makes it so much less about test of talents and things of that nature, which are kind of the natural evolution and escalation of these turns mirrors. But the turns deck, in that time where we didn't record, really became kind of the narrative about, current Magic that, hey, like this 4 plus Time Walk thing is almost unbeatable. Like it goes over the top of everyone. We can do things like play a 7 mana unsummon all non-land permanents card as a way to answer these aggro decks. And we can work and we can find ways to beat these sort of things. And we're getting better and better for the mirror because nothing can beat us. And it turns out maybe that isn't true, Spencer.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So I think that the problem with this deck is actually summed up by other decks in this tournament. I think one of them they only 4-6'd this event, but it is the blue-white tempo deck. Really similar to a deck that Mason and I kind of championed on different levels of like these, basically like these decks that just play a lot of tempo cards and then try to win in other ways. The blue-white version I think did bad because I think he actually played against all 3 Mono Green players and lost to all 3 of them. but I think the
metagame decks.
Yeah, I think the point stands that like the thing is Andre Strosky. I think that there's 3 of them, right? It's Andre Strosky, Sato. I think there's another. Maybe there's 4 of them, or a whole 4 of them. Oh, Sivka. Either way, these players that brought this list, it clearly came out. Going into Sunday, people believed this was the best deck in the tournament. Also, I think going into the event, people believed this was the best deck in the tournament. That didn't turn out to be true. Grixis definitely was the best deck in the tournament. The problem with this deck specifically, in my opinion, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because I have actually not played with this deck. I played against it a ton. I think the problem is like, if you're going to do the dragon stuff after board, why not just do the dragon stuff? Like, what actual value do you get by being a turns deck? And maybe that's just because people decided to play Grixis and they just like dumpstered all over this for the mirror. But like, at what point do you just say, all right, if you're going to play Duress, I'm just going to play Smoldering Egg? Because once again, I said this on the podcast 2 weeks ago, I've literally never lost a game after flipping a Smoldering. It's just actually never happened. I actually wonder if it's impossible.
I got to stop us here. Do you think Grixis is the best deck from this tournament?
Oh, absolutely not. I think Dragons is the best deck from this tournament. I think that is the narrative that is being given on Twitter and on Magic Podcasts. I think Dragons is the best deck from this tournament.
I misheard you then. Okay, I'm gonna keep it a buck. I think that Grixis deck's unplayable.
Okay,
I think that deck is really bad.
It had the best results in Standard for this tournament, but
sure.
It's just factually true. I'm just looking at that.
I'm not doubting it. I'm laying my stance. We know that can be true, and I'm looking at the stats right now. It's a very good performance. That deck has some pretty big problems.
I agree. I think that anytime you're going to main deck, yes, I agree.
You're going to have a lot of issues.
100%. First of all, I think that the same thing is true that we said 2 weeks ago. If I play this deck, I'm going to lose to Mono White. That's just going to happen. It was already true with Dragons. I think that it's it's a bigger problem with this. So if I'm going to lose to Grixis in the quote-unquote mirror, I'm going to lose to Mono White. And then for some reason, I didn't look at the numbers, but didn't Mono Green like have a pretty good matchup against this deck after board? Or something? I don't remember whose tweet I saw that said that. But like, at what point are you just going to admit that maybe the maybe the 2-color taking turns deck is a little overrated, and you should just be doing like the medium stuff all along. I don't know. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear from you though, Mason.
I'd like to hear from Abe because
yeah. So I mean, it's hard because it's such a small field tournament, and there's so much of like this game around what is that weekend's metagame going to look like. And I think that, you know, if you're looking at just the turns deck, it's hard for me to say that like the check house turns deck was not the best composed like deck list in the tournament. I think the problem was that it was kind of, and maybe not even a problem, but you know, that doesn't mean it's the best deck in the entire format. That doesn't mean it's, you know, just like the format solved or anything. It just means that if you're looking to optimize what was, I think, the best archetype coming into the weekend, you know, assuming it could take the kind of unfavorable matchup for the against the aggressive decks that the turns deck and dragons deck was having, and turn it a little bit more favorable, which I think it did.
Is that true? What was actually the mono white record against the Shek deck?
Mono white is only like, from what I've heard from players and testing, and like a friend of the show, Brittany, Top 12 the SCG, a lot of them feel like it's 50-50 against Is It? And you kind of have your spike cards like Redain and Elite Spellbinder, and you have your gotcha draws, but they have cards that are getting at you. But your real draw is that you just absolutely clown the green deck.
Okay.
Yeah. Which has been true in my experience. I have just had a lot of issues actually overcoming the white deck.
I have not been able to beat the turns deck with green. I've been able to beat the dragon deck with green, so that actually tracks for me.
So if you look at, you know, what really happened there, which is you know, the deck lists are due on Sunday night. The only real big format data we get anymore because of the online era is these SCGs. You know, Simon Nielsen won the SCG with mono green pretty handily. There was a ton of mono green all over the top 8. So, you know, the narrative coming out of that event, the last thing you get to see before your deck list is due, if you're a player playing that event, is mono green is the deck winning the field. So you have to decide, am I on team, you know, mono green is the deck to play? Do I think I can build Epiphany right so that I can beat mono green and other people are going to play it? Or do I want to like split against both of those things? That's like, it's kind of this leveling game of like, do I try to beat the deck that was the best deck just now? Do I try to beat the deck that I think people are trying to work on the most, which is the Epiphany deck? Or do I, you know, try to beat both? And I think the Grixis deck was in the spot of beating both, but you know, it's such a small metagame that to say like green got dogged, it's not that good, isn't at all true, because green, you know, like you said, like won the SCG again this week. Very strong deck in a very open field, but in a small field that's very condensed, you know, things can just be weird like that. I think that, you know, this especially shows in Yusutake Hashi's winning deck, where he didn't drop a match in Standard, where he had the dragons in the main deck, but all of the Epiphany players were really caught up in fighting over the Epiphanies. They thought the iteration Epiphany Shell was the one you needed to have to beat mono green. Yuta showed up with these Goldspan dragons and Smoldering Eggs that are very, very good in the mirror matches, and was really rewarded for it because he was not playing into the dynamic of like Lear being a card that was turned on, which was a card that the Grixis decks and some of the blue-red builds turned to handle the creature decks. You know, there's not as many Disdainful Strokes, way more Test of Talents. So, you know, things just kind of came together right for him. And yeah, so I think that like if you're looking at Epiphany, the best built one, and probably a list that still holds as the like coming out of it, this is just the best iteration Epiphany deck, unless things change around it, is that Check House Epiphany deck. But you know, you got to remember that the tournament is so small and is this special glimpse into this, like, you know, 6-hour window after all the information's out and before deck lists are due, into what those pros are thinking and what they're hedging on. Not necessarily an indictment or you know, a display of the format as a whole. I
thought I was so smart for putting Teachings of Archaics or whatever in my Delver deck. I was like, man, nobody else is doing this. I'm so smart. It was like literally 4 days later, everybody was doing it.
I remember in testing, I had a game where I used the galvanic iteration to copy that down. I copied it down 4 cards, so I drew 3, then drew 2. That was pretty nice. It's the only time I've ever seen the card do anything.
Yeah.
A bit of a draw scare. Yeah, no, I think the Izzet decks are obviously the top end of the format, right? And one of the kind of the balancing acts going forward, if you're playing, maybe a local thing or a Moto Challenge or Arena Ladder or the Invitational, is kind of figuring out hey, how am I going to position myself? Am I going to be playing these main deck test of talent so I'm ready for the mirrors, or am I going to be playing Disdainful Strokes? How hard am I going to hedge for these things versus something like green as well? How am I going to position myself in my deck, and how big do I want to get in this arms race? Because if you get too big, your other matchups get so much worse a lot of the time, and that is a real cost to these sort of decks. We kind of mentioned it a little bit before this and kind of threw it to Abe when talking about this stuff, but Grixis specifically, Abe said it was built to be blue-red and built to be mono-green. And while I do think it has draws that can do both of those things, and there's some benefit to playing a deck like that, I think the current configurations are not good enough at doing either one consistently enough for my liking in an open field. And I think things like mono-white are going to take up in popularity as green continues to kind of sort of be this thing. And players are scared of Alrund's Epiphany getting banned. There's a financial cost to these sort of things. And so I don't know how y'all feel, but I am really low on the current Grixis decks and think they need to do a lot to fix and change their stuff, because I'm unsure why the Grixis deck is the deck to play Lyra in and not blue-red with just Lyra in the sideboard or something along those lines. So
I actually have an opinion on this, and I actually think that it's oh my gosh, Test of Talents is not the name of that card. What in the world just happened in my head? I actually think the answer to this question it was really clear to me after I played Takahashi's list this week. And that's actually Divide by Zero. The Grixis decks don't play Divide by Zero, and because they don't do that, and their actual mana cost is actually lower overall because of that, they then get to play the is it Lear? How do you say it? Because I've heard it 3 different ways.
I just say Lear.
Okay, that's how I've heard it too. But that card is not good with Divide by Zero for what it's worth, because you actually can't play enough cards to get with your Divide by Zero to flash it back a bunch of time, to flash it back, the additional copies, flash them back. If you look at the winning deck list, there are exactly, I believe, 3 learn card or lesson cards. And I believe that the blue-red versions play 4. They play the exact same 3 with an additional, the card we just mentioned. And I already have had games where, if I had ever flashed one back, I would not have had enough.
But you can just loot.
Oh, you can loot.
Yeah,
that's why you were rolling your eyes at me my entire time and didn't interrupt me.
Yeah, I was just there's got to be more. But also,
no, there's not more. Your mana cost does go up, unequivocally. Yeah. That's true.
Well, so this is I'm going to leak a little testing here, whatever. I think that doesn't have to be true. So I believe Fading Hope is good enough at being your answer spell against a lot of these decks. So you can play Fading Hope to answer Olga's Troll, Seeker's Chariot, Ren and 7s in the place of that 2 mana spells, and you still have the Divide by Zeros, and then Fading Hope and Divide by Zero actually also serve as a package to protect your Lear, which will get you into the late game. And so what you do is you kind of play those sort of things post-board against green decks as an answer to these problems. And then if you Divide by Zero in the late game, I think just putting their thing back typically will be enough, and you can loot, and there are the good lessons we can have, but we also get all those lessons back again. So I think we'll be fine on that sort of stuff.
What you just said, one of our points in our show notes is what are the biggest lessons you learned from the deck lists? Fading Hope is actually my biggest lesson learned. This was the thing I was going to talk about, is I was so wrong about that card 2 weeks ago on the show. I've played it a ton since then. That card belongs in any deck that can play it that it is beneficial for. It was funny because when I said that, Mason was like, I don't know, have you played it? I was like, I played it a little, but I've probably cast that card 100+ times since then. Fading Hope is the real deal. The fact that like it deals with the wolf token right after a ranger's class, the fact that it deals like the troll you just mentioned, the green is really expensive. Like that is so much mana. I was wrong. Like I was just straight up wrong about Fading Hope.
Yeah, I had Fading Hope and Demon Bolts. You know, a lot of this is really funny to me. Like, I built a deck that had kind of the right removal package a while ago with like this, the Beat the Cherry deck, as I called it, where like you play like this Delver style of game plan where you have Demon Bolt and Fading Hopes and divide by 0. And I really do think if you put that sort of package in a turns deck or a Dragon's Turns deck, and you just kind of scale up for how the metagame's evolved since week 1, you actually have like a very good suite of removal and answers for what's going on in the current metagame. By like a pretty good margin.
I also think that it's pretty important to note that the those spells, Demon Bolt and Fading Hope, play particularly well in the Galvanic iteration shells as being cheap spells that turn your iterations on early. Like there was a lot of games we played in testing where like you were playing Mono Green and I was playing turns, and if I went like turn 2 Foretell Demon Bolt, turn 3 iteration Demon Bolt both of your creatures, it put you so far behind. In a similar way, you know, a lot of the creatures in Mono Green, they're big, but they're slow, big, beefy creatures. You are just paying mana for stats that leave something behind, or you're making tokens and stuff. And so that investment, that time is really what the turns deck needs before it can get to its inevitability of like copying Alrund's Epiphanies and going off. So that was really important. I think that like, for me, that was kind of, you know, a really big takeaway for the deck list is that like time was really important in this small metagame. And Fading Hope was definitely emblematic of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't have to permanently answer everything all the time, and Fading Hope really does exemplify that, and it allows you to kind of cheat on lands a little bit too. Not much, but you do get a little scry, a little selection, which I can think could be
just a little taste.
Important. Yeah, I think we should probably mention Mono White real quick here before we kind of get into the things outside of the actual decks. Deck did not do super great. You know, Saito and Ikawa both came in there.
In a 50% win percentage, Mason.
Yeah, which is like good, but not great, right? Like,
it's super funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, especially like I thought that the Mono White deck had a really good matchup against the Turns deck. I was like, that was the deck I was afraid of with all my Dragons decks, my Turns decks. I thought it like probably was decent against Mono Green. If you built it right, and then to see it kind of be a flop, I thought that would be the choice that would be a breakout deck for the tournament. I think a lot of people said that because there was this big narrative about Epiphany being too good, and people saying, well, you know, you can combat it by staying lower to the ground, and it didn't really happen that way. I thought that was really surprising.
Fun fact, I have an opinion on this. I think that you should be doing something. I obviously have been championing this mono white deck, and I'm going to do it again right here on this podcast. If you want a mono white list that will win you games against Epiphany on ladder, it is in our Discord. I like straight up. I literally have had former patrons message me like, "Is this really that good? Is this Planeswalker that good? Is this card?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's way better than the stinking familiar that these guys are like." I promise you that you can beat this deck. You just have to play some enchantments. You have to these lists are like almost 20 cards off from the list that I've been promoting. And nothing against these guys. These guys are far better Magic players than me. I do believe fully. I mean, we talked about this deck 2 weeks ago, and we talked about is it Paladin class, the one man like. If you don't have Paladin class in your deck, you're giving up insane equity against the blue-red decks. Like, just you're giving them so much extra time. So I actually really hate the way these mono white decks were built. I think it's
I would love to be able to pick like the brains of the players who brought it to see like how they arrived at some of these numbers. Like their one drop suite is obviously, you know, interesting. The choice of main deck portable hull is interesting. I
mean, Ray Saito is like historically one of the greatest deck builders and like Magic players of all time, right? So like I am clearly not saying I'm better than him. I'm just saying that I do believe.
I just wonder what
Yeah.
their picture of the metagame in their mind is, right? Because
Yeah.
you can clearly pick out, I want to beat Epiphany, I want to
Yeah.
have these cards to handle it. That's the approach I want to take. I just wonder what their approach was, and it was pretty shocking to me that the mono white deck just didn't perform, better than.
I think that they valued Elite Spellbinder super high in this format, right? Like, one of the things that if you followed us in the Discord, and Mason, feel free to chime in. Like, you guys are actually the ones that talked me off of Elite Spellbinder. That like I didn't need it because I was playing those Paladin classes, and I moved those Elite Spellbinders forward. Both of these lists, I wonder if they're on the same team, but like they're both playing 4 Elite Spellbinder in the main deck. And Elite Spellbinder. What's that?
Their decks are identical.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I think Elite Spellbinder is in an interesting position where like it's really good against the blue red decks, but man, that card is so bad against like mono green that it's insane.
Yeah, it's. I think when you have Paladin class, that card. Those 2 cards compete for a lot of the same slots, and then this one is like a higher mana cost, like Elite Spellbinder, so it becomes kind of awkward to play. While Elite Spellbinder, in this sort of deck, you don't have Paladin class, you kind of have to load up on them. My read from looking at this deck is I think they thought that mono white and mono green were going to be slightly bigger portions of the metagame. And my assumption for that is cards like 3 Fateful Absence, 2 Portable Hole. Portable Hole is not good against the mono green deck or the blue-red deck outside of Egg, and I guess like Ranger's class, I guess, where the Werewolf gets outsized really quickly in this sort of matchup where it just kind of gets traded off. So I think that they kind of thought, like, hey, other people are going to come to this sort of deck, yada, yada, yada. We need to be sort of prepared for that. And I think you can see that in cards like having 3 Adeline in your deck is really respectful for like the mirror and stuff like that, where that card's really good, and it's really respectful for green, where that card's really good. Adeline on the play against a green deck is back-breaking. It is a very, very strong card. And they just have 3 of that, and it is not that great against the the blue-red deck. So when looking at these deck lists, I think they maybe thought the metagame would look a little different. They even have like cards in their sideboard that seem to want to like shore up those matchups more and less for the Epiphany. So I'm unsure if maybe they thought their matchup was better, or they thought a lot of like, because I believe that they have Curse of Silence
in the place that I have Elite Spellbinder, right? So like they're clearly thinking that they can board in Curse of Silence against Epiphany rather than the reverse, right? So I completely agree with you, Mason.
Yeah, there's just a lot of interesting things going on. I think this deck might actually be better for like an IRL tournament metagame where there are cost considerations for things like people will do their best to get the deck they can, but they will not always succeed. And when cards like Goldspan Dragon are $200, I think that we're going to see maybe a little less of this deck than we should. And I bet like if you did a poll for, let's just use the Stars to Games Invitational since it's the only standard tournament that looks like we're going to be having. There might be an NRG that has like a standard side event. But basically, I wonder if I polled everyone in the room, hey, if I gave you infinite money, what deck would you play? I imagine more than some of them would say, or more than like a small amount of them would say, I would play the blue-red deck. But it was too expensive. There's too much fear of bannings. And this deck is really, really good. Like the white deck at beating green, at beating the decks that try to, like the blue-white control deck, this deck just demolishes. And like we said earlier, I think it is true. I think at worst, like whether you play Paladin class like Spencer is, where you load up on Redains and Spellbinder like these people are, I think you can get the Izzet players a fair bit of the time. I think it's so like 50-50 at worst.
For what it's worth, for what you just said, Mason, we have this sweet sponsor. They're Oasis Games. You can check them out at mtgoasis.com. I actually am buying this deck in paper to play on Wednesday nights at Oasis Games. Not this list. You can find my list in the Discord.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to help. There you go. Boom. Get that for the Invitational. Or now you get your cards in time. I have my deck coming from them in the mail right now. But I think that's going to kind of do us on the big decks there and some of our thoughts on the decks from the metagame. Abe, did you have anything you want to say about Mono White? Spencer and I kind of bounced back here. We've both been playing a lot of Mono White. I don't think you've played a lot of it. Do you have any thoughts about the deck in general, though, that kind of differ from what we were saying?
No, nothing outside of the surprise that it underperformed my expectation. I really thought, based on my experiences, the mono white deck would perform really well in that field, and it just didn't. So,
fair.
Like that.
We kind of talked a little bit about some of the stuff we've learned from the deck list here. Did anything surprise y'all, kind of in the same vein that Abe mentioned how he really expected white to do well, and it did have a 50-50 win percentage, which isn't terrible, but not kind of what we were expecting. Was there anything specifically for you that kind of was surprising for you at this tournament?
Yeah, actually, I was pretty surprised by 4 Rangers class in the teamer deck. So for those who don't know, like, I'm obviously always going to be the guy that's going to try like the teamer and the Naya and the Jund decks, right? Like those are just like the things I like to do in Magic. One of the things that surprised me though is like, I don't know if that it surprised me as much as like Jean Emmanuel really got what I was thinking about this format. Like, where it's like, okay, this format is about these specific things, and I'm actually a little surprised he lost this event, especially in the manner in which he did, which we'll get into later, or maybe we won't. I'm not sure where we'll end up on the show notes, but like, it is very clear that despite the poo-pooing on Sentinel into Outlaw, that there's something real there. Like, it definitely is. And I think that he ended up at a conclusion that I probably should have ended up on earlier. I personally, when I see those 2 cards, I want to play Showdown of the Skalds. Like, that's where I want to be with those cards. I want to use all of them mana every turn. I want to like go ham. And he's like, you know what? Maybe just leave mana up for negate and disdainful stroke, and just like you just play a Gruul deck that like it beats down. And his list is so clean that like it looks like one of those lists that like somebody comes up with week 1. But it's so funny because like he's specifically attacking specific things, and I really love that. Like, I'm the type of guy that immediately cuts an Outlaw for some spell that I want an extra copy of, or like stuff like that. And he didn't do that. Like, he very clearly knew what he wanted, and I really respect that. And it I don't know if you guys watched as much of the coverage as I did, but like, this dude crushed it. Like, just absolutely knew what he wanted. I was impressed. I was impressed with the number of Ranger class. I was impressed with just his overall. I think he had a turn where he activated his Outlaw to get a Goldspan Dragon one turn. Like, this is something that I've done in Naya a couple of times, where you're like, your opponent just like forgets that that's a mode on that card. I was really impressed. So.
Yeah, and I think what you said about this deck looking like a deck you play week 1, and then like, I think it literally was the deck that like did. It was one of the decks
like identical almost to the deck that won
the standard challenge in week 1.
Yeah,
but I think there's a lot notable about this. Like, it really adopts what is good about the core of the Gruul package. Even looking at the sideboard, it can go up to like this kind of werewolves aggressive draw of these Keswick naturalists, and like the full 4 Stormseekers and Briarwood Trackers in some matchups. It can kind of like just shift the way it's presenting its threats. Yeah, I think it is kind of funny that it is just like, yeah, this deck obviously had chops in week 1. Where did it go? And where it went was to the Finals of Worlds. So
I'm trying to think about things that I learned about, besides boarding out, burn down the house is always wrong, or anything along that sort of
That's
line.
a different segment in the show notes, Mason.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm speaking in the abstract, of course. Sheesh. I would say a lot of this was affirming for me in a lot of ways on things that happened. There were a lot of things where I kind of thought stuff and like had opinions on Demon Bull and Fading Hope and et cetera, and in particular, like for my article the week of Worlds, I put Is It Dragons as the S tier or the A tier, whatever it was, version of the Is It deck to be playing going forward in that weekend. And much like last time I did this with the Goblins, I got a lot of pushback from people saying that, oh, the turns deck is way better. And while it is results oriented, you said did win the tournament, not losing a game in standard. So I think there's something to the Dragons deck.
Actually,
I think people are just too quick to kind of write off having a mid-range game plan and what I mentioned last time on the show of actually winning a game on Magic.
Actually, I'm just going to take a moment. This is not... Mason did not pay me to say this or anything. I tweeted this like before I rejoined the show that Mason has been like in my top 3 favorite writers in the last couple years. And I actually did read that article. And I actually was following the tournament closely because of that. I think that too often we as Magic players... I know that people say this all the time, but I don't think we actually take it to heart that we try to get too cute, we try to get too smart, and the truth is like, 2 weeks ago I said, I literally can't lose a game when I flip Smoldering Egg. Fun fact, every time Smoldering Egg flipped on camera, it won this weekend. Like, at some point you just have to admit, like, okay, is the problem Moonveil Regent, or Moonveil, is it Regent? Moonveil Dragon Regent thing? Is the problem the 5, like, what is the actual problem? Because if I'm winning every game... also, fun fact, I was wrong about another card that Abe was right about, which is freaking Dig Through Time with Flashback. What in the world is happening here? Like, what is happening? Like, we just... Modern now, Spencer. I don't know how I know, I saw that. Like, at some point, we just have to admit that we get too cute. We have to be the smartest person in the room. And you don't have to do that. You just have to win the match in front of you. Just win the match in front of you. It's all you have to do. Mason, I love your article. My point is like...
Did Patrick Sullivan doing a pitch on...
I actually didn't watch it. I haven't watched it yet. I feel guilty.
The video's very good. I spent $20 to get
I know. I know. I had a rough weekend.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I was hoping it would help push the needle a little bit. / it was, it was...
I mean, I'm sure it did. I don't know what your numbers came back as, but...
they didn't help that much, but it was worth it, and half the money went to a good cause. So
can we talk about your sideboarding comment though? Because I think that we can combine two things. The two of our next points are sideboarding conversation and watching to learn. And I want to start with watching to learn. I put these in the wrong order. I think that while it's funny to like dunk on people on Twitter or whatever, I think that what's really important is like, why are you watching Worlds? Are you watching it because you enjoy watching Magic? I actually do enjoy watching Magic. I know that I'm like in the minority on that and stuff, but I actually usually am watching Magic to learn. I had a moment where my team had an SCG feature match where we had a player board a specific way. And just a really popular SCG player who I think kind of sucks, tweeted about us and just our team.
Say it's Abe already, man.
No, it's not Abe.
There's a lot of tension.
They don't. I actually don't need to play Magic anymore. But just blew up our team. Blew up our team. And the thing is we won that match because of that board plan. Like, and the thing is like at some point. You have to, like, take the opportunity to, even if you don't agree at the end, even if at the end of the day, you don't agree with the thing the player's doing, if you take a moment instead to ask yourself why, instead of sending a tweet or instead of, blasting them in your Discord or in your Facebook group or wherever you're doing it, just take a moment to say, why did this person do it? You will, you will improve so much more. And the truth is like, I've done this. I actually have a history of commenting on Mike Flores articles on Star City Games where I'm like, you're an idiot. Like, what you're saying isn't even true about the format. I said terrible, horrible things to Mike Flores on his articles. I'm ashamed of it. At some point, you just have to admit that taking an opportunity to learn is better than taking an opportunity to dunk on somebody. That being said, there were a lot of interesting sideboarding decisions. The one I want to comment is actually on the finals, where they boarded out Elrond's Epiphany against the Teamer deck.
Yeah, I think that's right for its worth.
I also think it's right, but like it was mentioned 32 times.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you gotta have some talking points. You got a best of 3, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3, whatever it is.
Why do you think it's right though? Like, help the listeners understand why you agree with that.
So basically, the assumption is that like your opponent is if you look at Germano Depraz's deck, he has main deck negate, so he's coming prepared, and then post board he has Disdainful Stroke for you, and you could argue maybe Tangle Trap probably comes in that matchup. He did bring it in that matchup for its worth in the post board games, and so he's going to have a lot of cards that are.
I assume he brought in those Reckless Storm Seekers too, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean. Probably did. You gotta get the beats on.
Yeah, exactly.
You got some deck cards in your main deck. No, but he's gonna have a lot of cards that are for answering your bigger cards, right? Like the Tangle Trap's gonna answer the dragons, and the Disdainful Stroke answer the dragons and the Alruns. And you can only do so much when you're Utah to actually change your deck, in my opinion. And so you have to do what you can. And so what Utah's decided to do is like, hey, I'm gonna board out these really clunky Alruns Epiphanies. I can't unfortunately board out the dragons as well and completely juke these sideboard cards, but instead I'm going to try to either slam a dragon when it's safe, like if they tap out for something on turn 4 and maybe I counter it, or it just doesn't matter and slam a dragon, or I'm going to wait, set up counter plus threat, and then kind of go for it. And it's much easier to do the latter, where you're setting up these things when your deck is less of these things that actually end the game, these threats, and are more answers. And so Yudo is just trying to trade off cards, get to a point where, hey, I'm playing a Delver game plan. I've got this Goldspan Dragon. I've got some answer spells, and that's it. So I don't know. Abe, how do you feel about it? Because you've been, call a spade. Abe's been playing blue-red a whole bunch. I've been playing mono-green a bunch. We've both played the other decks as well a good bit. But what do you think about the plan? Do you agree with Alrund's Epiphany coming out?
Yeah, I think specifically against this wet gruel strategy, this teamer deck.
Moist gruel. You got to call it the right name.
No, it's wet. It's full on wet. There's counter spells in the main deck. That's wet. Water, not wet. Main deck negate, wet. But yeah, so the reason your opponent's playing those counter spells is to trade on your biggest thing, like stopping you from epiphanying and taking over the game. You probably don't even have to go that far over the deck if that's their plan, because they're going to try to just deploy their small things, line up their negates and disdainful strokes with your epiphanies, and keep you from pulling ahead, stay ahead with their cheaper cards. And all you're doing by leaving your epiphanies is playing into that game plan. If you, in the games where the game goes that long, you're so favored anyway, because their game plan is to try to kill you before you can even get to the epiphany stage and stop you from Hail Mary epiphanying them anyway. So, why having a card that's just so far over what the game is about? As for why they mentioned it so much, the deck's called Epiphany. It is.
That one's not right. That one was clearly dragons.
Oh yeah, well, but the talk is still Epiphany is the best card in the format. Epiphany is too good. How can you say it's the best card or it's so good when it's not even good in all the matchups? And the answer is, people are targeting it. And so, if your opponent, it's a good, simple, building blocks lesson of sideboard for the games that you're going to play, and in the post-board games, your opponent's going to be targeting your epiphanies. Don't give them the opportunity. Play a game where you're going to 1-for-1 them with your burning hands and whatever. Use your smoldering eggs and goldspan dragons to really seal the game. And they don't necessarily know that you're not going to have epiphanies, so they might still have to respect it with their counter magic and hold. So, I think, though, the single biggest thing that I learned from watching play, if we're talking about watching to learn, was there were so many times watching Strasky, who is one of the best Magic players in the world, unequivocally. It is impossible to argue otherwise. He is just so good. Was he would cast Divide by 0. And I'd be thinking, what am I trying to do here? What less am I grabbing? And he would just rummage. He would be like, I am going to discard this land to draw a card, because I feel like if I high roll here, I was trying to break down what is it he's looking for. I was like, maybe he high rolls here, he gets an epiphany, his opponent just tapped out, he got this big mana leverage, now he's trying to get ahead of it. And there were just simple things like that where it's why would he make this play? Why is he doing this? And when understanding that thought process of how he's playing the deck, how he's winning so much with it, and how the check house really came to determine why their build of the Epiphany deck is good was really telling when he was like, we are ultimately a combo deck. Sure, getting the lessons is really good. The fact I can go up a card is good, but sometimes I don't need the card out of my sideboard. I need one of the cards in my deck. And that was just something huge and eye-opening, because I don't think about that. I try to just make my Divide by Zeros, a bouncer thing, get up a card.
Yeah.
instead of like
I have a question
thinking about it in the full context.
for both of you, because I think you're both playing more Magic than me. When you look at like the Grixis deck versus the Shaq deck, it actually feels like they had a really clear sideboard plan, whereas like the Grixis deck was like pile of good card sideboard plan. Is that how you guys felt looking at them?
Yeah, I think I don't know how Abe feels with this exactly, but I know that I mentioned it earlier on the show that the plan for the Grixis deck stands to be like, I got a little bit of this for green, and I got a little bit of this for Izzet, and I'll figure the rest out. Like, like that's kind of what they're doing, and their sideboard's very much like that stuff that I had for green, and giggity out, come on in some other stuff that's kind of the same, and they're kind of like two halves of a deck that they try to make into like one good deck, and it's something that, once again, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like is good for something like Worlds, maybe worse for something like an open tournament. Abe, how do you feel about that statement / do you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were some really, really powerful hammers in the way that the game is supposed to play out in the sideboard for the Grixis deck. Like, I know that we observed that, like, Go Blank plus Iteration was like, if you, like, fork to Go Blank, Epiphany just can't win. It's over. Yeah. The game's done. Pack it in. It's just not happening. Like, that is so good. And also, like,
the conversation of splashing Go Blank in the blue-red deck happened for like a hot second. Where it's like, can we just play this off our treasures?
Good. Like, can we just do this? This is so strong. And when your plans are that good, and I think another big impressive card from that Grixis deck was Celestis, where getting ahead of mana was really unpunishable almost. Like the mana rock was good and enabled them to play more of these black 1-drops, like. Casting Duress after casting it made it less punishing to tap out, but also just the patterns of like those mirrors letting you loot a lot more. Like off the Celestis was really good. So it was. I think Grixis was probably the worst built deck of the tournament. It was the least cohesive, but also it had two maybe three goals in mind of like I want to have a plan for beating decks that are like this, like Epiphany, and I want to have a plan being these, and I think it succeeded in that, but that does lend it to being a pile of cards. As an archetype, we hadn't really seen at all in any capacity. I hadn't seen anyone tweet about decks like it. I hadn't seen anybody, play it in SCGs. It was really a novel idea, and for it to come together to, a deck worthy of registering in Worlds was in and of itself impressive enough, and the elements were there, but it definitely wasn't refined.
It's one of those decks, I think, that people will look back on when there'll be some event on Moto like Play of the Worlds Search in 2021. And they're going to be like, what were these idiots thinking, or whatever? And it's like, this happens a lot like week 1 opens. People are like, they look back and like, you played mono red week 1? That's unplayable. And it's like, well, the deck was like actually going to evolve to become unplayable. And like, it was kind of really good for that tournament and had a lot going for it there. And this deck has that going on for it there. And I don't think that it's not like the end of Grixis. I think there are definitely builds and things you can do to Grixis to like make it move forward, but I think the current configurations just aren't quite there for a much more open field, which it wasn't built for. I'm judging it on something that its goal wasn't done. It did the cask. It's a girl boss. It's a queen. It's an icon. It's the moment, and I'm putting it in an unfair box. But that's also, hey, that's my job. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, I feel like that Grixis deck kind of has spawned a lot of the interest in the blue-black control decks that I've seen popping up over that. That kind of happened in tandem, right, with the SCGs. But seeing those Worlds deck lists kind of gives you the inspiration of, oh well, this like Lear thing is really strong. Apparently, like people are willing to kind of go out on a limb and build their deck around it. So maybe it's worth exploring in a different shell without the stuff we don't like about the red cards. So it's it wasn't the full. It was like definitely a full baked concept, but it wasn't. They didn't have the time to hash it out. It seems like definitely a real Brit.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else that we kind of want to go over here when it comes to sideboarding conversations? I feel like there was something, and now I've got the lights on me, and this is my moment. Eminem talked about it, and I'm just blowing it, but I can't remember what it was, so I don't want to waste too much time here.
I do remember there was a moment where it was questioned whether or not you should board in Goldspad Dragon versus Burn Down.
Oh yeah, taking out Burn Down the House against Monogreen versus.
I actually, so for what it's worth, I think that the important part of this conversation, regardless of what side you come down on, is actually just having a plan. This is something that we've talked about on the show. Like Michael as long as he was here, it's just like and I actually thought about this week after all of this happened. It's just like at some point, it doesn't really matter what your sideboard plan is as long as you know what it is and you have a reason for it. Because you're going to play towards the thing that you have a reason for what you're doing. Because you have an understanding of what that is. At the end... Oh, go ahead, Mason.
No, I'm amen. That's what I was
saying. At the end of the day, if your plan is to just wipe their board and be the control deck, sure, burn down the house is great in those moments. If your plan is to, specifically cast your freaking Elrond's Epiphanies and just win with Dragon attacking 2 times, then that's better. It doesn't even matter what creatures they have on the board at that point. So it really comes down to, at the end of the day, and this is actually one of the topics that we have on our docket for, writing your own sideboard guides. At the end of the day, the important thing is knowing why you're doing what you're doing. Not, because you're never going to be 100% right on what's best in a matchup. You're just not. You're not smart enough. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many matches of Magic you play. You're just not going to be there. Instead, do what you believe is best because of the experience that you've had, the people you've talked to, the Magic you've watched, and I think that will solve a lot of problems for you, and you'll win more matches of Magic that way.
Love it. Let's wrap this up with what we play here before we kind of get into our Patreon question, start wrapping up the show here. If you had a standard tournament, let's say I don't know, some sort of big first tournament after a pandemic.
Or maybe an arena open or
that's this weekend. And the Red Bull's also this weekend. There's a bunch of standard tournaments going on.
Do we think that there's a standard banning tomorrow? When no?
I'm zero shot. My stance is this: is if you're WotC and you think there's anything in Crimson Vow that will move the needle a good amount, you do nothing. Because as I've mentioned on the show a bunch here, we're 28 days from the new set. Let's go, team. Let's go.
I hate
28 days. Anyways, we're right around the corner, and previews are going to start. And if you actually think it'll move the needle, you shouldn't do it because it will get people excited or whatever. And if you don't think there is, you should definitely ban something with Elrond's Epiphany,
right?
Because that will dominate the conversation. So I'm under the assumption that I think they knew this. They put some cards in Crimson Vow.
Yeah.
But I have no way to know for sure. I can call Michael real quick if you want. But
no, I think that we should not call Michael and ask him that question because we love Michael and we don't want to get him in trouble. I'll go first because my answer is only slightly different depending on if there's a ban tomorrow before this episode comes out. If Elrond's Epiphany is getting banned, I'm playing Naya Showdown. That is 100% the deck that I would immediately start working on. I think that specifically Felidar Retreat is something that the second you don't have to worry about Epiphany, just breaks any green-red mirror wide open. I think that I would play Teamer still. Otherwise, I've played a ton of mono green, and I think that Teamer. I actually do think the Outlaw plus Sentinel is actually so much better than everything mono green is doing. The second that you decide that you're gonna play a bunch of Rangers class and really use all of your mana, except for 2. that and the other thing that I was thinking about in doing this is if I'm gonna play this many Rangers class, I'd love to play Hermits out of the board, so I make sure that I'm disrupting my opponent on key turns. There was a lot of things that I thought that even though I loved his list, I talked about on the show, I would work on some Teamer stuff.
Abe?
I really like the Dragons deck, man. I've said a lot of... We did a whole episode on Blue Red, and there's just, something about... If I had played more competitive Magic in the year 2008, I would have played Fairies. And that's all I have to say on the issue. I am a huge Yuta fan. I think he did great. I was really happy to see him win. And I think that maybe not exactly that 75 of Blue Red Dragons, but I think that, Goldspan Dragon, Alrund's Epiphany, red removal, blue counter magic, it's hard to not like it for me. So that's where I'd be at.
Yeah, I think if there's a banning, I'm not playing mono green. I think there is I'm sorry. If there is a banning, I am not playing mono green. If there isn't, I am. It's basically where I'm at on it. I think that the blue-red deck is slightly more powerful than the mono-green deck, but the mono-green deck just doesn't stumble. And I put not stumbling at a very high premium. And I don't think that the blue-red deck is even that much more insanely far ahead unless they inbreed for me. And you know what? If someone wants it more, then they want it more, baby. That's just all that comes down to it. I've got extra snakeskin veils in my deck. They're going to have to really want it more than me because I'm kind of already gunning from them a little bit. So, that's kind of where I'm at on things. But I actually think that the mono-green deck is, for it to be good in its current form, actually needs Alrons to be part of the metagame, kind of like a leech that's on a shark, and like feeds off the things that goes by the shark. Like I need the shark to scare things away from me because there are a lot of things that just destroy mono green if you don't have that doing it for you. So there is a banning tomorrow. I'm gonna be very mad about like $200 for cards from Oasis Games. Luckily, I saved a bunch of money using codes, but we'll see. No bans. Also, man, this episode's gonna be awkward if there's a bunch of bans. Anyways, let's move on to our Patreon question. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg. You get part of the access to that Discord. You get to see the deck list like Spencer talked about. You're going to get to do something really cool that Spencer's going to talk about right now before we get into our Patreon question, which is a benefit of the show. Spencer, what's this cool thing I'm hyping up real quick?
Yeah, so I'm going to do a Discord contest. So you specifically need to be a patron of $5 or more to enter the Discord. And then what we will be doing is everybody for Crimson Vow can enter a deck list for the contest. We'll make a separate Discord channel for this. And then Abe will pick his champion deck list. Mason will pick his champion deck list. And then I'll pick the winning deck list. And then we will round robin battle each other, whether it's on stream or whether it's recorded. And then the winner of those events will win a CCMTG care patch. You'll get a playmat. You'll win some Oasis Games store credit. We'll kind of figure out what the exact prizes are in probably, before the next month. It'll be announced in the Discord. So if you want to be a part of that, join the Discord, which is $5 a month on Patreon.
Awesome. Perfect. But like we said, you have to ask the Patreon question, which is one of the cool benefits of being a patron on the show. We have an interesting one. This week's is, how do you expect the meta change when Crimson Vow comes out? And I have an answer for you. This is a great answer. I can't actually tell you it's in a time capsule, and I have to see all the preview cards first. But if you listen to Constructive Criticism episode 393, should be the episode when it comes out, I will tell you the perfect card because I'm never wrong during a set review. But I don't want to ruin the surprise, so I'll let Abe and Spencer handle this question.
So I don't know that I kind of agree with Mason. Like, I can't answer this question until I know the cards, but I have a hope, and that is that we are no longer forced into snow aggro decks, and we can play 2-color aggro decks in addition to snow aggro decks. I think that while it's really cool that we have Faithless Haven, I would really like to see even like 2-color mid-range decks. Like, the mana is actually not that great in Standard right now, and I'd like to see that change.
Yeah, I think that, as they both said, you can't really know what's going to change until you know the cards, but I do have a couple hopes. I agree with the, maybe something that makes the mana a little better, draws us away from this trend of wanting to play Faceless Haven, which is kind of like, you just have to play a bunch of snow basics and play one color because you're playing a bunch of snow basics to enable it. But, maybe some more 1-drops that are playable. I would like some more diversity too, because it feels like a lot of the cards in the format that are 2 mana really are very same note. They're very it's a lot of mana accelerants, a lot of Lotus Cobra, Prosperous Innkeeper, even the red-black legendary creature from AFR, just like enters battlefield, makes a treasure. It's a lot of that stuff. And hopefully something that makes Alrund's Epiphany strategies like a little more tax, because right now it is kind of chocolate and vanilla of Faceless Haven and a curve, or removal spells and a top end of Alrund's Epiphany. And so something that kind of shakes, maybe not shakes, but spreads those things further apart, polarizes things a bit more, opens up more room in the middle for other decks to exist. I would love to see something like Blood on the Snow become really playable. I think the card's really awesome. I think those mid-range decks are really fun for a lot of players. They really like that style, and right now they're kind of pinched. It's really rough.
Well, where can everyone find us? Spencer, I'll let you go first here on the old social medias.
You can find me at Spencer38. You can find my other podcast at Need to Nerd Pod, and then you can also see some of the other nerd stuff I'm doing on the entire Hazy Game Media Network, whether it's producing Sam Black's show, whether it is... I have a review coming out of Mass Effect 3 Mason. Yeah. So we have an editor editing that right now. You can find that all on the YouTubes and stuff like that. So
awesome. Abe, where can they find you?
You can find me on twitter.com/morenothings, MORENOTHINGS. I know everyone loves spelling. And, you can contact me directly via DM or reach out through Facebook message request if you're interested in coaching. I've got good rates and stuff, and I'm really looking to...
Fun fact, there's
more.
a fun conversation that happens every time Oasis gives sponsorship money about Abe's email, because it is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I love having picked an email address that you can pronounce or spell or say like 3 or 4 different ways. So how about you, Mason? Where can the people find you and your lovely work?
You can find me each and every week here on Constructive Criticism. You can find me writing for Card Kingdom over there, where I talk mostly about standard and historic. And you can find me on Twitter, occasionally giving great insight, but most of the time just posting memes at twitter.com @MasonEClark. Thank you all so much for hanging out for this week's episode of Constructive Criticism. Can't wait to see you all next week, and we'll see you then for another episode.